So I might kick off with a few incidentals while people are still joining. My name is Mitchell Jones. I will be your host for today. I'm the Outreach Editor at Resources Conservation and Recycling. A big welcome to everybody returning to our English language webinar program that is every second Thursday at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So all of our webinars are sourced from recently published resources conservation and recycling articles. So the scope of the program is more or less matching the scope of the journal. So you can expect to see all kinds of interesting webinars on the topics that the journal covers. You're going to hear a little bit about that in a moment when I introduce the journal. We do ask that our speakers are providing their webinars or their presentations in an accessible fashion. We have to bear in mind that not everybody is necessarily an expert on the topic, but maybe wants to be or is just interested in the topic. So we do ask for minimal jargon and explanations of principles, basic principles, before moving on to the more complicated topics. So registration is necessary. You can find the registration links in the monthly newsletter, Resource Conservation and Recycling newsletter, which is circulated towards the end of each month. You can also find the links on the social media pages on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and in the future, they will also be posted on the Elsevier website for the Resources Conservation and Recycling Journal. If you're unable to join because we're at capacity, you can always watch the live stream on our YouTube channel or also catch up with the archived content, the previous week's webinars there on YouTube. YouTube channel is youtube.com/@RCR Journal. As a final point, we do really appreciate your feedback to help us tailor this program to be everything that you hope that it might be. So if you have a moment to a couple of minutes, because that's honestly all it will take, we have a few questions at the end of the webinar in a survey. It would be really helpful for us if you might consider filling those out. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now so that I can briefly touch on our program for today. Just going to make that full screen. So we've had our welcome address. And I'm about to provide an introduction to the journal. After that, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Nadia. Thank you for being with us, Nadia, today. Then we're going to touch briefly on how things are going to work today, which is the same way that they work every time, but for any newcomers, just a few details. Then we're going to have the presentation, which will take approximately 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes of question time. And then I'm going to close things off by providing the information for the next event in a couple of weeks' time. So our journal, Resources Conservation and Recycling. No doubt you probably know the journal, but our emphasis is pretty broad. We have a wide range of topics: systems-wide strategies, technological, economic, institutional and policy focus, resource management practices, conservation, recycling and resource substitution, resource productivity improvement, restructuring of production consumption profiles, and transformation of industry. All that good stuff, big picture thinking. For today and every other day, we do ask that communication is in English so that everybody understands it, or at least those people that speak English understand it. Closed captions are available and running currently. So if you are watching without audio or you need captions for some other reason, they should be there for you and hopefully working. They seem to be working quite well today. Sometimes they are not the best, but today they're okay. If you have any questions, be sure to post them in the Q&A during the presentation. We will go through those questions in the order of popularity. So if you see a question there that you would also have asked, then be sure to upvote that question rather than re-asking it. If you prefer to ask your question in person, we can actually accommodate that. Or if you just want to speak, you can do so. You just have to indicate your interest in doing that during the question time with a raised hand reaction. If we have time in that 10 minutes beyond the questions from the chat, then we'll be happy to accommodate your request to join us on the floor. So our speaker for today, Nadia MALINVERNO. I'm not going to try and butcher her last name, a lovely Italian last name, which I am not going to try. But anyway, Nadia MALINVERNO, she works at the Swiss Federal Laboratories for Material Science and Technology. She's going to be speaking to us today on material flow analysis of workwear textile waste as a starting point for circular economy. So Nadia is an environmental scientist with a master's degree in environmental science from ETH Zurich and specialization in policy analysis and environmental systems. During her studies, she gained valuable knowledge in interdisciplinary work, environmental governance, consumer behavior, sustainable agroecosystems, nutrition, and circular bioeconomy. As part of her master thesis, she identified the need for a circular workwear textile management in Switzerland and conducted a material flow analysis of workwear textile waste. Since 2021, Nadia is working as a scientist at the Swiss Federal Laboratories for Material Science and Technology, EMPA, in the Technology and Society Lab. She works in the field of sustainability assessment, safe and sustainable by design, and material flow analysis. Oh, and this is the part that's always tricky because the captions always get in the way. She's involved in different projects regarding topics like negative emissions, technologies, wood use, and wood-based materials, valorization of food waste in Switzerland. So a big welcome to Nadia. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours, and I'll hand the floor over to you, Nadia. Thank you.
Perfect. I will share my screen. So first of all, a warm welcome also from my side, and thank you for the presentation, Mitchell. And also thank you for having me and also the opportunity to present our work and research here. So today I will present you my findings from the study of identifying the needs for circular workwear textile management and material flow analysis of workwear textile waste within Swiss companies. And I conducted the study together with Melanie Schmutz, Ben Novak, and also Claudia So. So the textile industry is currently following an unsustainable linear model that, due to its production, use, and disposal management, represents a stress on natural resources. The inclusion of circular economy principles has been identified as a promising solution to this problem, as they stimulate the reduction of resource consumption, the reuse of textiles, and also the recycling of materials. To reach circular textile management, all the different life cycle steps of the textile value chain have to be considered, from production to procurement, lifetime, collection, and also disposal. In the end of life, incineration should be prevented and reuse or recycling should be encouraged. When reuse and recycling are both considered, the reuse is found to be environmentally more beneficial than recycling, as it prolongs the lifespan of the textile. Nevertheless, the recycling of textiles contributes to the circularity of the textile sector. But it should be emphasized that these recycling methods are currently mostly applied in an open loop system, which means that the waste product will be processed and used in another value chain. As closed loop recycling processes, here the waste product will be processed and used within the same value chain, are still under development. So the recycling process is challenged by an inconsistent influx of high quality material and different material compositions. Moreover, the sorting process is complicated by overly diverse or colored fibers. Ecologically and economically sustainable recycling requires known material composition, high quality material, uniform materials, and high quantity. It is assumed that these characteristics are present in workwear. So the term workwear refers to a simple and robust textile, such as overalls, coats, jackets, pants, and garments with company-specific logos. In our study, we did not include highly specialized workwear, for example, fire protective clothing, as they must meet certain safety standards that are not easily adaptable. In the current scientific literature, no data could be found on the quantity and material composition of workwear. There are some European data, which I will show you afterwards with the result in comparison with the data we found. And there are few studies on the life cycle or environmental impacts of textiles, but not on workwear. And none of the studies examine the material flows or the categorization of workwear. In Switzerland, only the following data on textile waste is available. As shown in this figure, the data can be found in only in our study, so we showed it the first time like that. We had a look at the amounts that were disposed of the household waste that is seen here, and also the ones that are collected, and added it up to this number here. And this results in 12.5 kilograms per person per year of textile waste in Switzerland. The reuse and recycling and incineration rate we have determined with the data of Texaid, and Texaid is the textile collector with the highest market share in Switzerland. And all this showed us that there is no quantity or material analysis of textiles in Switzerland. This led us to the following research questions. So what is the amount of material composition of workwear textile consumed and disposed in Switzerland? How is the workwear textile waste managed in Switzerland? And what is the recycling potential of workwear textile waste in Switzerland? The first step was then to contact larger Swiss companies that use workwear from different industries. And a questionnaire was used for the data collection, and we also conducted interviews with the relevant persons there. The questionnaire assessed following points, so the amount and material of workwear in different life cycle stages, especially on the amount of waste. Then also how the management of the workwear works in the company, and for example, if they have a take-back system for the clothing, or what they pay special attention to. From this, then we worked out the material flow analysis for the year 2019, which we show the workwear with weight, material, and also category. Category means that we have taken, for example, all the t-shirts or pants in one category because they consist of similar material. The categorization also simplifies the analysis and also the determination of the recycling potential. For example, whether it's worthwhile to collect only a certain category in a company or not. As a first result, we have here the overview of the workwear management in Switzerland or in the interviewed companies. Here we see, for example, that the laundries, here they may have leasing contracts with companies that need workwear and also have a washing and repairing service. And with the leasing contracts, the clothing come back with a take-back system, so they can track the workwear over the entire lifetime. At the end of life, here, there are different ways to dispose of the textile, so through normal waste or through a textile collector. And through the pathway of the textile collector, the workwear is reused, recycled, or incinerated. This is the total mass flow analysis of workwear from the interviewed companies over the entire life cycle. And the colored bar card is with quantities per workwear category and the material categories. An important point that we can see here is also that just a small part is taken back by the companies. The rest is disposed by the private persons, so it's not clear where the workwear goes at the end of its use. For the calculation through the pathway of the private person, we use the numbers from the Switzerland that I showed you before. And with this number, we then try to model how much of the workwear ends up in the household waste and how much ends up in the clothing collector. And here we zoom in the end of life. We can see that if the textile ends up in the textile collector, they are either incinerated, reused, or recycled in an open cycle. And if it's disposed through the household waste, then it's incinerated. We see here that a lot is recycled, but also incinerated, and only a small part is open loop recycled. The largest part of procured workwear belongs to the category coats, tops, followed by pants, coats, accessories, and thermal wear. Regarding the material, we can see that the material category is mostly mixed materials, so we have 2 to 4 different materials in one garment. And for example, the tops, they consists of a large part of natural material, which is cotton, or synthetic materials such as polyester. In order to put the data from the companies into a more general context, we have tried to extrapolate the data for the whole of Switzerland. To do this, we calculated the amount of workwear per employee in the companies. This data was multiplied with the data from a Swiss statistics that 2 million people in Switzerland wear workwear, and then calculated down per person in Switzerland. This data corresponds to a value of 1.6 kilogram per worker, or 0.4 kilogram per person per year in Switzerland. So we see here that we have an amount of 3,200 tons of workwear in Switzerland per year that needs to be managed. For the calculations and the extrapolation in this study, we came up with some assumptions that we have to make, such as the data from the statistics on how employees will dispose of their clothing, or the percentages on how much will be incinerated, reused, or recycled, as the companies could not give us precise information on this. The study does also not cover all the workwear in Switzerland, as certain categories were excluded, such as protective wear. This leads us to the conclusion that there is still need for more precise monitoring of workwear in companies in order to obtain better data on quantity and material. This data is important as the base for the circular economy or for the circular management of workwear. Especially in waste management, more transparency should be created. More information on workwear waste, for example, can help to sort the clothing more easily and thus better classify which pieces can be reused or recycled. Comparison of the data from our study with the quantities of the Swiss textile waste shows that workwear corresponds around 3% of the textile disposed in Switzerland in the year 2019. For Swiss textile waste, it can be assumed that workwear is already included in the total amount, as all types of textiles are represented in the statistics. Compared to European data, for example, we have the 0.1 kilogram per worker in the Netherlands, or the 0.94 kilogram per worker in Denmark. Our Swiss data is higher, but here it must be noted that we have calculated with the data of people who also wear workwear, and the European figures with the percentage of the population that works and not necessarily wear workwear. Another European statistic speaks of 0.3 kilogram per person of workwear, and this value is comparable to the value of 0.4 kilogram per person in Switzerland. Our work made it possible for the first time to obtain information about the quantities and the materials in workwear. And there are no big differences in the material composition of workwear and normal clothing. However, it can be said that higher quality materials tend to be used in workwear as companies focus on durability. Moreover, in the workwear, rather few fiber, mostly only two, are mixed together. And the blends are mainly polyester with cotton. And this is also seen here in this figure, where we see in the mixed materials, cotton and polyester are represented in higher quantities. The material and categorization of workwear was important to determine the recycling potential. For example, if we look at the tops, they are mainly made of natural materials, so cotton, and there is already fiber-to-fiber recycling. Also with the coats, here there is a recycling potential because they are available in relatively large masses, and the part is made of pure synthetic materials such as polyester, which could be mechanically recycled to new fibers. This result could mean for the companies that it would be worthwhile to collect these categories in the company with a take-back system. For more circularity in workwear management, I can give you some examples. So it's important to consider all steps in a life cycle, and especially to keep the longevity of the textile in focus. When it comes to materials, you should make sure that you only use materials that are certified of good quality and also recyclable. Then with the logo of the workwear, it's also important to make sure that it's removable, for example, so that the textile is easier to recycle or to reuse. And during the use of workwear, for example, leasing contracts should be used so that the textile can be tracked well. This also is connected with the take-back system, so that the clothing is collected again and the company, and thus a better control at the end of that life cycle can be made, and it is also that it could be sorted internally. This all helps to create a circular waste management. Here, the cooperation between the companies, the textile collector, and the recycler is also very important. And if the quantities in the materials are known, this process becomes easier. With the study, we were able to demonstrate the flows of workwear life cycle of the interviewed companies and also the extrapolated amount of workwear waste per year for Switzerland, including the type of materials and the categories of the workwear textiles. The research showed that relevant amount of 1.6 kilogram per year per worker and 0.4 kilogram per year per capita of workwear occurs in Switzerland. According to the study, most of the workwear is reused. However, a significant amount is incinerated and could be instead reused or recycled to establish a circular economy. This result may provide a first basis to establish a circular workwear management strategy, as workwear fulfills the prerequisites for recycling by being uniform, of high quality, known material composition, and by occurring in high quantities. The study shows that professional data collection is necessary to ensure efficient and circular management. Professional workwear management has to start with the design and the material choice for a long lifespan and end with the collection and adequate disposal, respectively provide the basis to keep the materials as valuable resources in the loop. Moreover, a close collaboration with all the stakeholders of the textile life cycle chain, including collection and recycling companies, is necessary to make the organization of workwear waste logistically efficient and sustainable. In the future, a closer look at the organization of the end of life and the recycling potential and the efficiency of the waste management strategies has to be taken on a national, but also on a regional level. So all the further information and the sources can be found in my publication. And I would also thank all the co-authors, Claudia, Melanie, and Bernd, for the collaboration. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that lovely presentation, Nadia. Very, very interesting. So I will open the floor to questions if there are any questions. So you can feel free to either use the Q&A chat or to raise your hand digitally, virtually, if you'd like to speak. Just while we give people the chance to do that, I will kick things off with a couple of questions maybe. Yeah. So wonderful presentation, Nadia. Thank you very much. I was quite interested by a few points, actually. So the homogeneity of the material stream was quite good. You said that there was just primarily two things, right? It was polyester and cotton, I think you said. Yep. Was that correct? Yes. So that surprised me. Well, that's really good news from a recycling perspective, obviously, since, as we spoke a little earlier, the more easily you can sort those materials into individual constituents, the better possibility you have of actually being able to reuse stuff. So that was very interesting. I also love that you commented on the initiatives for the companies and the policymakers, sort of some more technical parameters that could be implemented in terms of the removal of the logos and that kind of thing. If you had some advice to policymakers or companies, apart from the technical things that you've just mentioned, would you have any sort of tips or any suggestions in terms of legislation, things that could help?
I mean, legislation is already difficult to implement, but I mean, all the circular economy principles, also the repairability of clothing, the reuse, also to take back the clothes and maybe also give the same clothes to other person when, for example, the person quits the company, could be something. But we also saw that there are a lot of struggles for the companies if they have high amounts of these textiles. They have like logistical or also infrastructural problems to take it back and also sort it in-house. But still, this could be one issue that could be tackled, and also the monitoring of it all and not lose it over the life cycle because it's material that is not coming back and not being like put together again and could be then recycled. Yeah.
So workwear is actually quite an interesting specific case study because, as you said, it is this very high quality material. Workwear is made to last, it's made to be robust, resilient, and even because there's a degree of business professionalism associated with a uniform, companies will actually invest in making the material of a high quality. So we have picked a case here. Plus, in addition to that, obviously, you've got the fact that if you want to reuse those uniforms, you can actually do that because if essentially everyone's wearing the same thing, and you have a set list of sizes, which if you're in a specific country will probably fit the majority of the population. So for workwear, this seems like something that could really be viable. It sort of is quite a narrow case study, though. This is quite a narrow part of the textile sector. And I know that the textile sector has huge problems with reuse. From what I hear, because given that we have a fairly small scope case study here with workwear, the idea, I suppose, would be to look at how we could apply this in a bigger sense to try and fix the problem on a sort of global scale. But we have this issue that things that work in this case study wouldn't necessarily work with the globe. So, this take-back system is absolutely fantastic. And it works for the workwear because it is high quality and because everybody's wearing the same thing. And you see some companies trying to start doing a take-back system. You see, for example, if you're in Europe, you might see at CNA or something like that, they have bins where you can basically return clothing and you will get a discount on any new clothing that you were going to buy, which is, I think, the beginnings of a take-back system or something similar to what you're discussing with the industry, workwear. But the problem with this is, as far as I've been able to see in a few documentaries, that people have to actually want to reuse those textiles. And a lot of the time, if you're living in a European country or something like that, a lot of that stuff that people bother to take and put in those bins because they want someone else to reuse it, people don't actually want to reuse because it's not the right fashion or it's not high enough quality to render it useful for reuse. And a lot of this textile waste then ends up basically being shipped off to, for example, Africa and countries like that. And there are significant greenhouse gas emissions associated with that transport. And then basically it gets sorted in these countries where they take the better stuff that they want. And then the rest of it generally gets disposed of in a very environmentally unfriendly way, in terms of it just gets blown into the ocean or things like this. I've seen this in some documentaries. So with this take-back system, it works very well for workwear, but we have this issue of, we want to tackle this on a global scale. And we have issues like this, people not necessarily wanting to reuse. You've got these people who make that moral decision. I'm going to take this back. I'm going to put it in the bin. But then in the end, sometimes the life cycle for that ends up being even worse because they cannot reuse it because no one wants it. It gets shipped, and in the shipping, there's emissions, and then it gets disposed of in a way that would not be acceptable by European standards. So this is a huge problem, I think, with the textile sector. And I think that this works exceptionally well for the workwear one. I was just wondering, do you think there's something we can take from this and take away from this and sort of think that we could apply this maybe on a larger scale, maybe with everyday clothes? Is there, I love radical thinking. Should people be leasing their clothes from C&A?
Yeah, also, for example, for the procurement of clothing, the standards are kind of the same that should be there for workwear and also the normal textiles, that you look at what kind of materials you're using, the recyclability and so on. And also the durability of the textiles should be something that should be emphasized in the textile industry and not just for workwear, but for all the textiles. The thing is that for kind of this, I would name it like the normal textile or fashion, you have a much higher consumption and also trends and all this stuff that is not represented for workwear. And also the responsibility of the disposal of workwear should not be by the private person, but the company itself. And this could be maybe also something that the textile industry could think about. that responsibility must not necessarily be by a private person, and also then that a collaboration of the different stakeholders could be elaborated. If then a company has this higher amounts, then the recycling of the textiles could be built up like efficiently. So this could be aspects that could also be like done in the textile industry, not just for workwear.
So maybe companies shouldn't be allowed to make low quality textiles,
for example.
Or maybe there should be regulations on the number of different fiber types, etc., that you can use in a given textile, and maybe some kind of compulsory labeling system so that this material can be sorted easily and recycled more easily, or some other application of the material. Yeah, sure.
Or also like, the overconsumption that all the textile industry has, that in a workwear sector, when you get new people, then you just order new clothing, and if you change maybe the design of the whole, like for the whole company, then you change it not like 50 times a year, you change it once or twice every 10 years or so, then this makes it also more sustainable. Yeah.
Or also, I suppose, if people are not willing to reuse clothes because perhaps they are not, ideally we would want a system which the clothing originates in Europe and is then reused in Europe. And if that's, as with Europe as an example, you could apply it to any region. But if that's not necessarily possible because people are not necessarily happy with wearing clothes that are the wrong cut or whatever else, perhaps the emphasis should, recycling is never going to be as good as reuse, but perhaps it's better to recycle the clothing than it would be to reuse it in another region, which requires it being transported to that region and a shift of that material to the point that it's then potentially a portion of it is reused, but the other portion is disposed of in a way that would have actually created an environmental impact worse than if that material had just been recycled in the region that it was actually used. Because also one of the good things about recycling, of course, is we can make new cuts, for example. It can follow the trends if it's a recycled fabric. And also that you can sometimes utilize some material which is quite degraded with better quality material. So material that you potentially wouldn't be able to use at all because it's degraded, you can mix a small percentage of that with better quality material and get something that may not be perfect, but is actually usable for something at the end. Maybe this could be something.
Yeah, totally. But still the recycling processes, fiber to fiber, are under development. And as you said, you have most of the times you have to mix it with new raw material. And then you kind of also have this mixture of recycled and raw material that would be of higher quality, because most of the time you don't reach the quality of the raw material if you recycle it. So the things that should really be emphasis is not necessarily, the recycling, yes, at the end of life, but the lifespan and the durability is key in the textile sector. But then, in the end, it should be reused as many times as possible. And if this is not possible, then the recycling should come. And totally. Also, if it's regional or not, this is still under discussion, and a lot of new projects coming up also regarding this topic, how and where it should be recycled. Because the materials are around, but everybody is always talking about that still some amounts are missing, or as I emphasize that a certain amount is necessary for recycling, and especially it should be made of the same material. And now we have like huge waste mountains in, for example, Mexico or so, but everything is mixed, and then recycle potential there is really hard to see, and also the sorting process has then to be built up.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, Nadia, for your presentation and for your time now discussing these things. So I might just share my screen again. I'm just going to touch on the information for our next webinar before we sign off. So our next webinar is on Thursday, the 15th of June this year, at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific Standard Time, like always, with Joseph Sarkis from what I originally would have said Worcester Polytechnic Institute, but is apparently Worcester Polytechnic Institute. So there you go, Worcester. Yes, so that's Thursday week. So be sure to join me then for some insights from Joseph on mitigating safety concerns as a barrier to circular practices. So a big thank you again to Nadia for being with us today. Thank you so much, Nadia.
Thank you for having me.
And a big thank you also to everybody who came to the presentation. Wonderful. So I'll wish you all a pleasant evening, morning, afternoon, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Ciao.
Bye. Thank you.